I'm Representative Mark Batinick, 97th District. I'm here with State Senator Barickman. For the 102nd General Assembly, Senator Barickman and I are introducing parallel legislation that would establish a recall process for all elected officials in the state, minus judges, and also a process to recall the Auditor General, the Senate President, and the Speaker of the House. Given the current climate of corruption plaguing our state, it is clear that the Democratic majority is not interested in taking the necessary steps to repair it. A look at the inaction over the last year confirms this. There is currently no citizen-led process for recall in Illinois. As a result, our state has suffered under corrupt leadership for far too long. Decades of corruption have been covered up, and these proposals will provide a clear path to correct the wrongdoings and give power back to the people of Illinois. And with that, I'm going to turn over the actual mechanism to Senator Barickman.
Yeah, thank you, Representative, and thanks to everyone for being with us today. As we're all aware, the recent indictments, the criminal investigations, I think have renewed the public's interest in seeing us enact reforms that equip them with rooting out public corruption. The reality is that public corruption, unfortunately, has a long history in Illinois. Of course, the separation of the Comptroller's Office and the Treasurer's Office all resulted from corruption that existed back in the mid-1900s. Unfortunately, today, we've seen all of the reform efforts being blocked by the political leaders. And the citizens, our constituents, are reaching out to us continuously and saying that we need to do more to root out the corruption that exists around the state. The reality is the public has little ability to remove a corrupt public official. Now, other states have enacted reforms that are useful in guiding us here. And in fact, what Representative Batinick and I have done is looked at some of those other states. There's at least 18 other states who have some recall provision available to their citizens. We've looked at that for best practices. And we're introducing those today, as Representative Batinick said, in 3 different constitutional amendments that will equip the public with the tools that they need to hold public officials accountable so that those public officials begin to serve the constituents and the citizens that they're elected to represent. What we're doing is empowering and restoring the power to the people here. So 3 constitutional amendments. First, an amendment to recall statewide constitutional officers, the Speaker of the House, Senate President, and the Auditor General. Currently, the Illinois Constitution allows for a limited recall of a governor. This was an effort put in place after Governor Blagojevich was indicted. That tool is very limited in its use. It's very complicated and cumbersome. And so what we do is remove the barriers on that and extend that provision to the other constitutional officers, again, the Speaker of the House, Senate President, Auditor General. It requires a petition to be signed by at least 12% of the number of voters who cast a vote for governor in the preceding election. Second, we propose an amendment that allows for the recall of members of the General Assembly. There's no provision today that allows the public to remove corrupt members of the General Assembly. We put that in place through our amendment. Again, it would require a petition signed by at least 12% of the numbers of votes cast for governor in that targeted district in the preceding election. And then third, we provide an amendment that allows for the recall of local government officials. Again, there's no provision in our Constitution today that allows the public to remove corrupt local public officials. We would do that again. It would require a petition. The number of signatures required is determined on a sliding scale based on the number of registered voters that exist within a targeted district. What's important to note here is that for all 3 of these amendments, if an individual was recalled, first of all, they would be ineligible to return to that position for which they were recalled for a period of 10 years. Second, for voters to effectively recall someone, they first would go through this petition process, and then ultimately it becomes a vote of the electorate. If 60% of the electorate votes yes to recall the individual, then that person is immediately recalled upon the certification of those that vote. Representative Batinick, I think with a few other comments before we turn over for questions.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, if we look at the landscape today, we have all sorts of local corruption issues. A lot stemming from the red light camera, but you can also look back at there's some township issues here locally in my area, highway department people who are doing their jobs from Florida, township people who are having workers work on their personal homes. We have an indicted sitting state senator right now. We have an auditor general who's been found in violation of election law, and he's refused to explain it for years. But clearly, the most salient situation is the speaker. He has massive power over state policy, but no direct accountability to voters. Right now, we have 55 members of the Democratic caucus still planning on voting for him and a governor that won't call for him to resign. The people of Illinois have been shut out too long. They are done with corruption, they are done with machine politics, and they are done with Speaker Madigan. Recall will bring the state some accountability when the majority party seems to have little. And with that, we'll turn it over for questions.
So our first question here is from Greg Bishop at the Center Square. How do you ensure recall measures for the various levels you propose don't get abused?
That's a great question, and it's something that the senator and I talked extensively about. And what we came up with was the thing that's different with our recall is it has a 60% threshold. So unlike situations in Colorado and Wisconsin where they get the signatures and it's just 50% to recall somebody, we want this for serious situations, not just where somebody is trivializing a particular policy issue or not. So the 60% threshold is obviously a pretty high threshold, and it would be done in cases where the abuse is obvious.
Okay, and then this is another follow-up from Greg Bishop. How do you get these in front of voters if not through the General Assembly?
In terms of, I assume that he means in terms of how do you get them on the ballot. It would be a constitutional question as to whether you could do a petition drive to get these ideas on the ballot. But right now we're doing our jobs as a state rep and a state senator, and we're proposing the constitutional amendment to go through the regular process of the General Assembly. I wish there was more empowerment of the citizens of the state. Obviously, we've seen petition drives, whether it be for term limits or fair maps, be shot down by the Supreme Court. I think that's a failure of our state constitution, and this is a small part of trying to change that failure.
I think I agree, and I think one of the things that Representative Batinick and I are trying to do here is raise the public's attention to the fact that their hands are tied today as a result of the rules put in place by the established political class, right? And Illinois is an outlier here. We can look at other states. Other states give their people more power to effectuate change. They give their citizens more power to remove corrupt public officials. But in Illinois, the public's limited at that. So I think by putting these proposals forward, we're raising the public's awareness to the fact that these rules can be changed. We can change them through the legislature, as Representative Batinick and I propose here, or they can be changed through a petition drive led by citizens. I'm for all of that. The point here is reinforcing to the public the reality that they should be equipped with more tools than they have to root out public corruption. It's a failure of our state that we don't allow our people and our public and our citizens to have more say on the corruption that exists in the state.
Our next one is from Dave Dahl. What plans do you guys have for the governor and the speaker in terms of recalling or impeaching them?
Well, again, look, on recall as an example, the political leaders put in place a recall provision limited to governor that exists in our Constitution today. It's very cumbersome in nature. It requires a citizen to jump through massive hurdles, including that those citizens would need to get the consent of a significant number of legislators from both political parties and in both chambers. It creates a situation where Illinois has a recall provision for governor, but it's in name only. No one would be able to use it. It's nearly impossible to use. So we're proposing to change that here, and again, equip citizens with the tools they need to hold public officials accountable.
Our next question is from Mark Maxwell. If Madigan doesn't have 60 votes, why would you need to recall him?
Well, I want to answer that going back a little bit. One of the reasons why I like the threat of a recall is preventative medicine. Let's go back to the state budget crisis. You know, a lot of people like to blame Governor Rauner for not passing a budget. I've read the Constitution multiple times, and every time I read it, it always says that the House and the Senate are the ones responsible for passing a budget. If you look back at what happened over this weekend, when the Speaker essentially praised himself for his action during the budget crisis, what he did during the budget crisis was win a political battle, but he was willing to put the state in peril because of it. So the purpose of the recall is not just the recall itself, but also as a preventative medicine feature. Now, if you fast forward today, look, by all accounts, it looks like the Speaker has a large amount of votes. And at this point, there isn't anybody who has coalesced around an alternative candidate to the Speaker. So one, there's the opportunity now where if the situation were allowed now, I'm sure the people of the state of Illinois would like to have the Speaker recalled. And that also might make it easier for some of the people who are a little weak-kneed in the Democratic Party to go ahead and move on from the Speaker because they would realize that he's about to be recalled. So I think there's all sorts of benefits of having this in the system. The politicians need to start looking over their shoulder a little bit. And when you have somebody like the Speaker who literally is not accountable to the people of the state, the people that he has a lot of control over, I think that's a problem. So this recall process at least gives the voters and the citizens of Illinois a tool to change the direction of state government when it's controlled by somebody like Speaker Madigan, whether it be now or in the future.
I want to reiterate something here, exactly where Representative Batinick's going. This is about accountability. How many times have we heard from our constituents who say all of the power and the influence in the Illinois legislature rests with the political leaders, whether it be the Speaker, the Senate President, and the public is furious about this. They say, why don't we get a chance to vote these people out? Why aren't they accountable to the state? If these individuals amass the incredible amount of influence and power that they have, why are they not being held accountable to the public? This is the issue that has to be solved. I heard the media reports over the last few days. There are private meetings occurring with House Democrats where there's discussions on who the next Speaker may be. There's discussions of a tax increase. There's discussions of the political use of redistricting that will be used. And all of these things are being discussed behind closed doors because ultimately, whether it's the Speaker or the Senate President, they're not accountable to you, the people. And that needs to change. And again, Illinois has that ability to change it, and we can look at the way in which other states do this to guide us.
Our next question is from Jim Leach at WMAY Radio. Would recall be limited to allegations of corruption, or would people seek recall for any other reason? If it's the latter, isn't that what the elections are for?
Yeah, let me jump in on that one. Yeah, that is what elections are for, but sometimes some of these local positions, they have their 6-year terms, which is a long time. It is the latter. It's not limited to we discussed ways to possibly limit this, and ultimately we came up with the decision that we'll let the public decide. If you try to define it too much, it's either going to be too narrow or too broad. And remember, this has the 60% threshold. So let's go back to the budget crisis again. We needed our leaders to have action. The Speaker needed to be engaged in actually wanting to fix the state as opposed to win a political battle. So if the recall was limited to allegations of criminal action, inaction on a budget is in and of itself isn't a crime. So you would take away that tool. But if the people of the state say enough is enough, we need somebody in there that's going to get something done, they should have the ability to hold a recall election. And a recall election is in and of itself a type of election. Other states do it. I think we have the barriers in there so that it's not abused, especially with the 60% threshold.
We've got huge challenges facing our state, and we all know that the legislative leaders have incredible influence on how those problems are solved. But in fact, the current system doesn't encourage the legislative leaders to solve problems. It encourages them to amass power. It encourages them to do things like gerrymander legislative districts and accumulate money and distribute that money to those who helped reelect them to be the Speaker of the Senate President. That's a flawed system that results in public policy failures like you're seeing in Illinois. Just like Representative Batinick says, we need the Speaker, we need the Senate President, we need public officials to be accountable to the public so that they focus not on what is to their political advantage, but instead on how they solve the problems facing our state.
Next, we have a question from Hannah Meisel. Would the amendments have any restrictions on allowing PACs to be formed for recalling someone? We saw massive amounts of money pumped into an effort to not retain Justice Kilbride this fall. That trend could keep going in an ugly direction that allows for manipulating the public opinion if someone with enough funding had a political score to settle.
Well, look again. This is a government of the people and for the people. The people need to be given the tools necessary to help them root out public corruption. I think this is a tool that absolutely should be given to the public. We shouldn't tie the hands to the public to be able to do things like recall public officials. We've created a process here, again, looking at some of the best practices around the country. We've put forward a process that I think has the safeguards necessary so that it's not going to be abused. Again, requiring certain signature thresholds to make sure before a recall question is asked, there's broad-based support for it. And then ultimately, that 60% threshold, that's a very difficult number, but it's not impossible. If someone is corrupt, I think that if a recall question is before them, the voters will be educated and they'll have an opportunity to vote whether or not they want to recall that corrupt public official.
Okay, we just have a few more questions here. Next, we have Sarah from Capital News, Illinois. Do you think you will have the support you need from both the House and Senate Democrats to bring these bills to the floor and get them passed?
I'll jump in first if you don't mind. I'll talk about the House, Senator, and maybe you can talk about the Senate. Our job is to put good ideas on the board and basically dare them not to follow those good ideas. The citizens are fed up. These are great ideas. We can vet them a little bit more. And, I've spoken with a lot of people. They think it's a good idea. Whether the speaker or the new speaker will allow it to go through, our job is, like I said, put good ideas on the board, and we're going to keep putting good ideas on the board, and then we're going to go to the public and we're going to show the difference between our good ideas and their lack of ideas, and ultimately the public will get to choose.
Yep, I agree. Same dynamic in the Senate. We've seen some reform efforts get locked up because of decisions of the political leaders, but our goal here is to advance the idea, to demonstrate the broad-based support that exists for this around the state. I think you talk to citizens of the state, whether they live in Chicago, the Collars, downstate, people want to hold their public officials accountable. I think this is a tool that many voters, whether they are represented today by a Republican or a Democrat, they're going to look at this and say, this is a good government reform. Let's be for it. I think it's time to do it. And I look forward to talking to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about how this tool could be helpful to creating more accountability and, again, focusing our government on solving the problems that's before us.
Okay, our final question is a follow-up from Dave Dahl. Is this an effort to try to boot out Governor Pritzker and or Speaker Madigan?
No,
I can. Go ahead, Senator. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say simply, I think that you've heard it over and over from us today. This is a tool that we think should be used. We want to empower the people of this state by equipping them with the tools necessary to hold public officials accountable to the people that they are supposed to serve. That's what this is about. Whether those public officials are at the state level, whether they're members of the Illinois legislature, or their local officials, what we've seen is that the corrupt activities that exist in the state have gone on for far too long, and the people are fed up with it, and they want to do something about this. Our goal here is to equip those voters with the tools they need. So again, the public officials begin to be accountable.
Yeah, and I'm going to add on to that. I think you nailed it perfectly. But as I said in my opening comments, we have an Auditor General for years who hasn't explained his campaign finance violations. We have a sitting state senator that's indicted. You have just Google red light camera and look at mayors, Google townships and look at corruption. So this is pervasive throughout government, and the people of the state of Illinois deserve more power to recall these officials when something bad is happening.
All right, that's all the questions we have. Do either of you want to give any final closing remarks?
If you don't mind, Senator, I'll add something real quick. I mean, look at what's happened this year with the lack of action with the Ethics Commission and the Special Investigative Committee. So the Special Investigative Committee, it's been put off. They're basically going to run out the clock on that regarding Speaker Madigan, and the Ethics Commission hasn't done anything. So it's time we actually start putting pen to paper, introducing good ideas, and work on getting them passed instead of having endless commissions and committees talking about things.
And I'll just say finally, again, the level of frustration that exists with the public, I think is at an incredible level. The governor himself pointed to this when his fair tax proposal failed. What we all saw, the polls said it, the constituents that I talked to said it. They said, look, I don't trust this government with more of my money. The actions, the activities that I see around Illinois politics and government, the corruption, these are constituent communications on a daily basis who are reminding us that because of the corrupt activities of this state, there's been a deep erosion of public trust. And we need to do something about that. The public deserves us to do something about that. And that's the widespread goal here. Again, empower the people so that they can hold public officials accountable.
All right, that's all we have for today. Thanks everyone for joining us. And if you need any follow-up, you can reach out to me.